Recently, I've been seeing the emergence of people recommending Ergo clears or just looking to buy Cherry MX clears, and I'm not too sure if it's a coincidence that there's some demand for them or if an influencer is speaking their typical garbage. Maybe in 2018 I would have recommended Ergo clears, but in the current day with an abundance of recolors, different switches on the market, I will never recommend Ergo clears in a good conscience. So what do I mean by this? It actually has nothing to do with the tactility of sand profile, but I don't recommend Cherry MX clears because in my eyes they have an objective flaw that might actually damage your precious keycaps. Cherry MX clear stems are actually different to every other MX stem and have an extra width to them on the vertical y-axis. Now this has been a thing in all the iterations of clears and isn't something new. Normally the vertical axis on an MX stem is smaller than the horizontal x-axis, however on an MX clear stem some of the sections on the vertical are essentially equal in size to the horizontal. Looking at the MX clear on the screen, I measured 1.27mm on both horizontal stem segments. I'll show some comparisons later, but this 1.27mm value is within spec, so it isn't what I want to show you. Now, when I measured the vertical y-axis part, I get a different value depending on where I measure. If I measure above the halfway point, it's within spec. However, if I measure further down, I get a larger value. It's 1.1 at the top and 1.2 towards the bottom. It might not seem like it at first glance, but to me personally, I feel like the relative percentage increase has the potential to be significant. The y-axis on some stems can be as small as 1.05mm, which means the thickest part of an MX clear stem at 1.2mm would be 14% larger. I understand there's a lot of factors to consider and this might not even be an issue because it's only a small section of the clear stem that extends, but to me when stuff like keycaps rely heavily on friction fitting, for peace of mind I'd like to minimize risk where possible and just avoid the possibility of stretching my keycaps. Comparing to some other switches I have on hand, it becomes more obvious that MX clear stems are really the odd ones out. Almost like they're not really meant for disingenuous 21st century enthusiasts to use and force into relevance, and are actually made so previous people in industrial environments can't accidentally pull keycaps off their machines. It will depend on the keycaps, but assuming that keycaps are being made with an asymmetrical thinner inner section on the y-axis, having a larger stem width being pressed into the keycap means there will be a tighter fit, and therefore it will be harder to pull the keycap stem off. Now, I'm not claiming that there will be damage to your keycaps as I'm unsure on the specs keycap factories are abiding to, though from my own experiences, I have found MX clear stems to be harder to remove, and there are others with experiences like this throughout the internet. So let's go through some possible hypothetical negative scenarios using Ergo clears might lead to. A. Harder to remove keycaps, slowing you down when you try to take them off, but the keycaps will still fit on other switches. B. Denting the keycaps with a wire puller because they're too stuck and require a lot of upward force to pull them off. C. The MX clears end up stretching keycaps so they no longer fit on switches or are a loose fit. D, which is pretty unlikely but still a possibility, actually physically breaking brittle tight fitting keycap stems on say artisans made from resin or POM jelly keycaps for example. And lastly that I can think of, you might accidentally pull out the stem from the switch housing, which would be pretty annoying because it may require you to do some desoldering. Feelings aside about the brown bad, tactility small, Ergo clear good, has bump. In a day and age where hot swapping switches and swapping pricey limited run keycaps regularly is a lot more common, I will never recommend MX clears to anyone I care about due to the potential of damaging keycaps, because I feel like there's an additional context that needs to be shared outside the scope of sense of touch and sense of sound. I'm conscious of the issue on MX clear stems, I own MX clear stems, I have experience with the stems, so I'm not going to nonchalantly recommend Ergo clears to someone in good faith. Even though it may meet the requirements of what they want in a switch, pre-travel, mild tactility, etc., I ultimately hesitate to recommend MX clears as there's a possibility someone somewhere might unfortunately be put in an unpleasant situation later on due to my recommendation.